my friend. Thanks a lot for tuning into the podcast. Hughes from the Heart, a very special edition. I have been looking forward to this interview for quite some time. I knew that when I found the book, it was meant to be. I do not believe in coincidences. I just don't. I think coincidence, and this is no offense to anyone, but coincidence is for those who lack imagination in the magic of the universe. Coincidence is for those who lack imagination and trust in the universe and the way the universe operates. Once you, and I don't claim to understand every aspect of it, but once you have a fairly even entry-level understanding of the universe and how it works, there's no room for coincidence. It's kind of like Back to the Future. Roads, where we're going, we don't need roads. It's kind of, I'll paraphrase. Coincidence? Where we're going, baby, you don't need coincidence. There's no such thing. We're going to talk about the law of attraction, the law of assumption. We're going to talk about Neville Goddard, one of my favorite metaphysical writers, lecturers ever. And we have a very special guest on who's written a book about Neville Goddard's mysterious mentor by the name of Abdullah. Abdullah from Ethiopia, and not much has been known about him. I guess you could say almost until now. He's remained kind of a mystery. And I found our guest, author Rebekah Jane Carter, really serendipitously through, I was going through Amazon, and every month or so, a couple times a month, I'll go through and I'll just buy a bunch of Kindle books. And the algorithm is so brilliant on Amazon that it knows that if you picked up this book on the law of attraction, you might like this author or that author, or how about this book? And it knows that I've bought just about everything ever written by Neville Goddard and lost lectures and all sorts of things by him. So it automatically kind of filtered this to the top of my suggested reading material. And it just blew me away because I had no idea that this book had even been written. And it had just come out, too, so it was all very, very serendipitous. If I had looked, a couple days before, I wouldn't have seen it probably, because I think I got it. I might be one of the first people to pick it up, and certainly not the last. And it's actually the first in a series of books, which makes it even more exciting. So get ready, get your popcorn out, get your cup of coffee or your soda, whatever, a glass of wine, and you're going to enjoy this conversation with our guest, who we're going to bring on now, Rebekah Jane Carter. Rebekah, what a pleasure to have you on. Thanks a lot for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is so cool. As I said, the algorithm, I wish the algorithm on other, or on social media were quite as good. YouTube's pretty brilliant, but I found that Amazon, for all the criticism sometimes people have of Amazon, it does a very good job, because when I go in there, if I were to go in there right now, you'd see what I'm interested in just from my Kindle, recommended books, or even physical paperbacks and hardcovers. It'll say, you've read this and this, try this one. And usually I trust it, and I read the synopsis, and if the reviews are, decent enough, I try not to read 2-star books or something, but if something's got a good solid 4, I'll pick it up, and that's how I found your book, which we're going to talk about here. You Are In Barbados, book 1 of the Abdullah series. And I got goosebumps when I saw the title of this book, because that title might not mean anything to a lot of people, including some of my own listeners and maybe people you encounter day to day. That might be kind of like code. And they're like, oh, that's kind of a cool title. What does it mean? And we're going to get into what that means just ahead here. But I want to start right kind of from the beginning and get a little introduction about you and your interest in this material. I first discovered Neville Goddard back in the Stone Age when I was in college, when I was at Berkeley back in the early towards mid-'90s. And I started reading, Feeling is the Secret, and just I became addicted to Neville Goddard, and I don't know why. Well, I know why. At the time, I was a very, very heated kind of talk radio host and wasn't into kind of the metaphysics of it. So I was very fascinated by it. But I really do believe the old adage that, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I was not ready. I was in my 20s. It was right around the time of my first marriage starting, long before it ended. And I wasn't in the right place to fully incorporate Neville Goddard's teachings into my life. I found it fascinating, but that's about it. I didn't really, really dive into him or become a true student of his until much, much later, probably into my 40s. So it took, 20 years fast forwarding before I really, really appreciated what he was talking about and what he lectured about. And the biggest pain to me was that he passed away when I was, right around the time I was born. So I was thinking to myself, what's the year on this stuff? He seems so far ahead of himself. You know what I mean? Like he was way ahead of his time. I'm like, can I interview this guy? And I'm like, oh man, he died when I was a little baby. So there's no way I could talk to him now. But thankfully, to people like you who've written books about him and specifically about his mysterious mentor, who we're going to meet here, thanks to you, more and more people are discovering him. And I'm pleasantly shocked at the amount of people on YouTube, a lot of them far younger than I am, discovering Neville Goddard. I mean, the algorithm triggers these people. You know what I mean? Like they spit it into my YouTube feed. So almost every video that pops up into my YouTube suggested videos about Neville Goddard or the Law of Attraction or Wayne Dyer or, any number of these philosophers and writers and lectures and stuff. And I am pleasantly surprised and shocked at how many 20-somethings and 30-somethings and millennials and people far younger than I am are talking about Neville Goddard. You know what I mean? Like they're getting familiar with him, which is so cool that so many young people are. I mean, I wish I had incorporated this into my life in my 20s, and I wonder where I would be today if I totally understood this stuff and practiced it for all these years later. But I love that young people are discovering him and his works and his lectures and who he was. What was your first introduction to Neville Goddard? How did you get involved in all this?
So mine was very different than most people, from what I've seen, come to Neville Goddard or Law of Assumption after Law of Attraction. And usually they're trying to manifest a specific person. That seems to be a very common story. That's not my journey at all. I was actually working on a different book project that entailed studying Black history. And in the course of that, I really got intrigued with Black spiritual leaders, like Dr. Maxine Mims, and then Michael Beckwith. So that was my introduction to Law of Attraction, was with Michael Beckwith. And then I'm not sure if it was something on YouTube, like Law of Assumption coach sharing Abdullah's story. I don't remember the specifics, but I heard Abdullah's story about how he defied Jim Crow. And, coming from reading, my whole bookshelf was full of things like James Baldwin. And, coming from that background to hearing, how just not even a mile or so away from where James Baldwin was just a little boy, here Abdullah was an old man with a completely different experience. Most people are familiar with, the history of the times back then and just the incredible story. So that was my introduction right there, was hearing his story.
This is fascinating. And for those who aren't familiar with Neville Goddard, he was born in Barbados, came to America, and originally, my understanding was he came to study drama. He was just in his late teens when he came to America, and in the early 30s, he gave up theater and started studying mysticism, of all things, and became a lecturer, quite successful one, eventually in New York City and toured around in California as well, in my old city of my birth, San Francisco, he was very familiar with, and in Southern California, he lectured a lot. And he eventually made his home in L.A., from what I understand. That's when that was the 1950s, and he gave a whole bunch of often televised lectures and stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to interject that if anybody wants to know about him, his biography, there's 2 books that just came out that I really recommend.
Oh, yeah,
One
please.
is by Mitch Horowitz. So Mitch Horowitz just came out with a book called Happy Warriors. And although his information on Abdullah is not the same as mine, well, it isn't in contradiction. It's just, he didn't have the information that I have. But the rest of it, especially about Neville Goddard, is very extensive. And these other New Thought leaders. So I would read that. And then there's also a new edition of Neville Goddard's Your Faith is Your Fortune that has, it's the paperback version, and it's from 2024 by Dominic Press. And it has this beautiful introduction written in the beginning of it that also is quite extensive. I mean, the research on it was very extensive. So those two books I would recommend anybody starting out curious about, the Bible, because I'm not as familiar with all of the details of Neville's biographical background as much as I am Abdullah. So I do recommend those two books to people.
Well, thank you very much, because I'm going to look forward to getting those, and I'll read those very enthusiastically. So thanks for throwing those out there. And what I think is an interesting connection, too, that leads me to believe from my introduction that there's no such thing as coincidence in the universe. I really don't believe that. I think that's for those who lack imagination and faith in the way the universe operates. It's a convenient term to say, it's a coincidence that you were thinking of your best friend you haven't talked to since college and the phone rang and it's your friend. That's not a coincidence. That's energy being transmuted, or whatever you want to call it, back and forth, and you basically were thinking of somebody, and then they started thinking of you, and then one of you picked up the phone, and it's not a coincidence. That's the way energy works. That's the way the world
transmutation.
Works. Yeah, exactly.
Neville called that transmutation.
Absolutely. Well, one connection that I think is really remarkable with you and Neville is that, tell us a little bit about your background, because I'm looking at your bio from Amazon and stuff, and it says you've had an indescribable love of the Bible since childhood. And I think you and I grew up Catholic, and I always joke I'm kind of a recovering Catholic now, and a recovering Californian, now living in not too far from you. This is really interesting. You're in the Pacific Northwest too. I'm in Mason County, and I think you're in Thurston County, right?
Yeah.
So we're
south of Seattle.
Yeah, we're like probably an hour away from each other. But what's interesting too is the way Neville dealt with the Bible, and it was a very important book to him. In fact, I didn't realize this until a few years ago, but he was asked if there was one book, if he was stuck on a deserted island, basically, and he could only have one book, what would it be? And he said the Bible, without hesitation. He didn't even pause. He said if he was allowed only one book on an island, it would be the Bible. And I know the Bible was very prominent for you too, since childhood. So I think that's an interesting connection, don't you think? I mean, even before you even knew who Neville Goddard might have been, I think that's really interesting.
He actually was instrumental in getting me to return back to reading the Bible. Because I did grow up memorizing large portions of scripture in the Old King James. I was in Bible quiz. I'd gone up against the deacons. I was a diehard Bible thumper, Jesus freak. I was the president of the Bible club in high school.
Oh, wow.
And I went to Bible college. I mean, talk about, I was very much into the Bible.
You had the t-shirt 10 times over.
I had actually considered converting to Judaism in my early 20s. And then I had some experiences, some psychic experiences, and I left Christianity. And hearing Neville talk about the Bible, it was really like getting reacquainted with an old friend, because I could not bring myself to, and I still do not read scripture literally, but I could receive it allegorically. The way he presented it, it made sense. It was the only way that made sense to me after all this time, because when I grew up thinking of the Bible as God's word, and if you love God, that it's God's love letter, right? And so if you really love somebody or an entity and they have this beautiful love letter for you, you want to study it. You want to hide it in your heart. And when you really do that and you start researching the root words, like I did, started studying the Greek and Hebrew root words and learning from, rabbis, and finding out the Jewish, of the Tanakh and what Western Christianity, what the New Testament did to the Tanakh. And it just is it's very, very heartbreaking. It's very hard to be a Christian and to realize what historically your people have done to another people and to their holy scriptures. And when you find out that the love of your life ordained these holy days to observe, and then, we went and observed the pagan ones, and just this whole thing. Like, I boycotted Christmas, and it was just this big thing, and in my early 20s. And so I hadn't really gotten past that. It was very, I felt like it was, I just couldn't receive it literally. It just does not. If you look at things from a Jewish perspective of the original Hebrewic understanding of God, of sin, of sacrifice, of all these things that have been completely taken a different way in the New Testament, it was just too. It was just too hard for me to process and to take, because there's just so much division. So the way Neville presents it allegorically, it's like, okay. And I'd already been studying. I love mythology. I love mythology. And so seeing the symbolism and just things just make so much more sense from that perspective. So yeah, I now I am back. I have scriptures coming to mind all the time that I use as affirmations. But yeah, it's like I've gotten reacquainted with an old friend.
Well, what's interesting is, and that's how Neville took it, because in the beginning I was kind of, I think it was because I was kind of rebelling against Christianity in a lot of ways, and certainly Catholicism, and just the way it was taught to me as I was growing up in parochial school. I was like the one kid in class that was like, huh? That doesn't make any sense. How did God do this if he did this? And what are you talking about? This makes no sense. How does it make sense to you? And the priest would kind of shush you up and say, oh, yeah, come on, move along, kid. You're an inconvenience here. You're undermining our whole platform here, our whole foundation. But I think the Bible is far more brilliant as allegory than as necessarily fact, or to be taken literally as it is by so many billions of people. I'm astonished that people insist the Bible has to be taken literally. I think they're missing out on so many lessons of the Bible if they didn't take it so literally. If they took it as allegory, it's arguably one of the biggest defenders of the law of attraction and the law of assumption, and so many things that come out of the Bible point to exactly what we're talking about here. The whole, knock and the door will be opened, and ask and it shall be given. And I mean, that's... Even Abraham Hicks had a title of their book. I think their first book is Ask and it's Given. Comes right from the Bible. And most of these metaphysical teachers see the Bible as a great tool, but not in the way that so many kind of hardcore fundamentalist Christians see it as. The
it's a mystery. So
yeah, it is.
And everyone's going to have their own version of history. So my take on historical events may be different than others, but my understanding is that the New Testament writers, the original early church, were Alexandrian Hellenized Jews, and they were mystery students. And that's why so much makes sense from that mystery perspective. And so Neville, when he's talking, he is teaching the mystery. So I don't know if you're familiar with mystery schools.
No, not really. Let's talk about that. It sounds fascinating.
Well, I'm not an expert. I'm still learning myself. I'm not a Rosicrucian, but I have great respect for them. I don't know a whole lot about them, but I have read just a ton of different Hermetic teachings, and I've listened to, and I've also listened to quite a bit of ancient Kemet, African sacred science speakers, and just a whole. There's these different groups of thought that seem separate from each other, but they also have a lot in common. So it's New Thought and Science of Mind, Theosophy, just a number of what might be labeled as a cult, but I think Western Christianity tends to view that word in a negative light, and it's not at all. It encompasses spiritualism, actually where Pentecostalism and stuff actually came from originally. There's all these different groups of thought, but they trace back. There's Hermetic roots that they have, and it's very, very fascinating. So I will recognize from different authors, I'll recognize things that Neville will say, like, oh, okay, I know where that symbolism is coming from. But then you get to a point where you read so much that I have so many screens open in my head that it gets to a point where there's not really one ultimate source for anything. Ultimately it's all from within. Ultimately everything is like Abdullah taught, that it's a projection of the arrangement of your mind. It's consciousness looking at all the contents of your mind and pushing it out onto the screen of space. So all the stuff that we manifest, that we consider as sources, they're still malleable. There's not one singular external, like I try to credit people as much as I can of, okay, I know this teacher taught this, but there's so many influences, and ultimately we do manifest it. So
absolutely. This is fascinating. I love this stuff because I remember as a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, the occult section was one of my favorites. In the bookstores, I mean, in usually it was used bookstores I would go to in San Francisco, and they'd have a sizable occult section. But it was one of those where I felt dirty. You know what I mean? It was almost like being in the pornography section or something. You know what I mean? It's like
I would declare spiritual warfare on the demonic strong. I thought it was a demonic strong.
Well, yeah, that's what the church wanted me to believe it was. That stay away from this stuff. That I was. It would have been more reputable for me to be caught trying to smuggle a Playboy magazine out of a 7-Eleven when I was 12 than being caught dead in the occult section, growing up Catholic. I mean, it was just, but I'd pick up these books and I'd just turn to a random page and I'd go, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. This makes more sense than anything I've been taught in parochial school. I mean, in this one paragraph, it's like the whole meaning of existence. And that's when I think I really started falling in love with what was labeled as the occult, but turns out to be all these kind of, like you said, the Hermetic teachings. And I'm really into all this stuff now. And if you look at my Kindle, there's probably 1,000 books on there of very obscure writings and obscure authors. But I've always believed, Rebekah, that people want to shoot the messenger so quickly, but if something makes sense to you and it resonates with you and it's practical in your day-to-day life and you can exercise it and use it to your advantage and you're not hurting anybody, who cares if it came out of the occult? Who cares if it came out of some strange tribe in Africa? Who cares if it came from some mysterious mystic? If it's relatable and it makes sense to you and it helps you in your life to be a better human being, that's all that should matter, right? I mean, it doesn't matter where else something's coming from necessarily.
Yeah, I within sorry, I was distracted for a minute there. Things saying that we have 8 minutes left, and I was trying to make sure this doesn't shut us down.
I wonder if it's set for like half an hour or something. Do you think?
I set it for until 9:30, so I'm not sure why it's doing that. So if it gets disconnected, then I will.
We'll start a new session. Yeah, and then I'll edit it all together. Yeah. It'll work out.
So with the manifesting community, there does seem to be some different trains of thoughts as far as life outlook. I relate more to Abdullah myself. He did have a very Jewish, even though I believe he was what is called the Ethiopian Orthodox Christian. They're still very Jewish, and they're called Jewish by other Jews like Ephraim Isaac. And one thing that's different from a Jewish outlook to a Christian outlook is that the Jew looks at God and life and says, God wanted to leave heaven and come to earth. God would rather be on earth than in heaven. So why are we so eager to get to heaven? And the book that almost made me to convert to Judaism in my early 20s is actually called To Life. And all of the festivities and ceremonies that they have are for the celebration of life. They're very much about community and just really focused on a happy life here on earth, whereas the Christian tends to be more, I want off the island. I want to go home. I'm an alien. I'm not home. I want to go, please take me now. And, more existential and more like Nietzsche's, Neville himself was all about the wheel of recurrence and not really happy here. He's constantly talking. He's like Blake. Blake was a big influence on him too. And whereas Abdullah, the descriptions we get from Neville about Abdullah are of Abdullah enjoying porter, fine London gentleman's beer, and going to the opera, eating what he wants, and just really seems more about that life, that fullness of life, regardless of circumstances, not letting anything stop him, not even the Jim Crow signs. And that's how I want to be. I do tend to be more heavenly minded. My grandmother used to warn me, you're too heavenly minded to be any earthly good. And I could very easily be like Neville and be like Blake. And I don't want to. I want to really have a life of harmony and peace and joy. And obviously we jumped into this book that we wrote for a reason. We're here for a reason, and we should embrace that and not be so eager and so eager to stop reincarnating, or so eager to go home to what Neville and Abdullah called Elohim. The divine society. That's there, but that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to enjoy life here now. So that's my outlook. It's more of a, I guess you might call a metaphysical Christian hedonist view.
Yeah, no, I like it. So tell us about, Neville Goddard, when I first heard about Abdullah, it was just kind of in a reference. It was an audio lecture I heard, and he talked about this guy, and I was immediately fascinated because there was so much kind of mystery revolving around this gentleman and who he was. And, he didn't say, Abdullah Smith or something, or Abdullah Jones. Like, we don't know who this guy is till I kind of look up and see if biographies have been written about him and if he was well known by a lot of people. So that just added to the mystery for me. And I'm sure that added to the mystery for you writing a book, and not just one book, but a series on him. How did this come about? How did Neville Goddard, who, he was a dancer, right? And he was into drama and stuff, and he came to New York City. And
he was he was actually in London with his dance partner for a short time, and the exact dates on that would be in those books that I mentioned. They give a better job on those specific dates. But he met Abdullah sometime between 1929 and 1933. Okay. And so before that, he and his dance partner had been in London, had been in England, and he had gotten turned on to cyclical, and I don't know if this is pronounced psychical or cyclical research, but he had met Arthur Begbie, and this, I believe, is in that introduction to the book I mentioned as well. So he was already interested in spiritualism. And spiritualism, I don't get into it a whole lot in the first book because I wanted to keep it really focused on the nuts and bolts of what everybody wants to know first. Sure. Before I go on what other people might consider woo-woo tangents. But spiritualism is, and Catholicism too, is part of the backdrop that I go into more in the second book. Because it was actually the Church of England who first took an official interest in spiritualism, and they also were the first to ordain Black ministers 200 years before the Unity Churches. You have to remember, at this time that Abdullah met Neville, the Unity Churches, ran by Charles Fillmore, did not yet, even though they had unity in their name, they did not yet at that time ordain Black ministers, and that's critical to know. Just things were not really as united as they may sound.
Right.
There was also at the time the spiritualists in New York were at war, basically, with the national body of spiritualists over the issue of racial segregation. There were forerunners to Abdullah. Like Reverend John White was a Black minister, and he died before Neville met Abdullah. So there was this whole backdrop that I didn't really get into the whole stage setting in that first book.
Sure.
But as far as how, so Neville, he had a friend who he called a Catholic priest, but then in other lectures he acknowledged he wasn't quite a Catholic priest. He had dropped out of the ministry, or out of college, excuse me, and his dad had been a rum runner, and he had wasted his father's money, and Neville didn't think much of him. So he did this friend kept trying to get him to come see Abdullah, and Neville delayed. And then he finally conceded and went to one of the meetings, and that's where he met Abdullah, and where Abdullah, he was like, you're 6 months late. You're 6 months late. The brothers told me, 6 months ago, and you're not, you're late. So that was his introduction. That was how they met. And that was at the old Morgenthau Mansion, 30 West 72nd Street in Manhattan.
Wow. And Neville was like, who the heck is this guy? How does he know who I am? And what is he talking about?
Yeah,
right? Like he must have been kind of like wondering what the heck's going on.
Well, Joseph Murphy, another student of Abdullah's, had a similar experience where Abdullah knew information about his family, about his sibling that Joseph Murphy didn't know anything about. And he confronted his mother, and his mother confirmed, that's right.
Oh, yeah. It was another sibling, right, that he didn't know he had?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Murphy had no idea of it, but somehow Abdullah did, which is very, very interesting and very mysterious, too.
Yeah, he was psychic, and actually everybody on that floor. So he was on the first floor of the Morgenthau Mansion, and that first floor also had a spiritualist church on it. It had a psychical, I don't know how to pronounce it, psychical institute.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so he was surrounded basically by mediums and people channeling spirits.
Wow.
So there was very much a thing. That's why he's talking about talking to the brothers. I kind of wonder if he was really alone and talking to the brothers. Because of the people he was around and their activities, I'm inclined to think that there was probably some spiritualist activity happening where he might not have been alone. I think that, so Neville seems like he tries to get away from talking about some of that. Like he doesn't want to be affiliated with it, which may be because there were, in addition to the racial segregation wars happening, there were also a lot of legal battles happening with the fortune-telling laws at the time, and actually a number of them getting incarcerated. The spiritualists were really fighting for recognition to be treated the same as a church, because they were very much against grifting. They were against profiting. They were very, very spiritual. They really felt like they had a message for the world about the dead not really being dead. And they really, I have a book written by one of the pastors on that first floor, and he had really foreseen the spiritualists as like a movement that was going to change the world, basically. And because they really felt that it would be comforting for people to know that, in fact, one of the New Thought teachers wrote a book or did a lecture that's actually entitled "The Dead Are Not Dead." I can't remember.
That sounds familiar to me too. Yeah, that sounds familiar to me. I've seen that somewhere. I think could it be on Amazon, or where would I have run into that? But
so If you go on YouTube and look up Brian Scott and look up his videos, he does a lot of audiobooks.
Yeah, I love him.
And it's one of his. It might have been. I don't know if that was Russell or not. I get these people's names in my head. I get so many of them swirling around, and then I get them confused. And there's two different Russells, and so I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was. But one of them, the title is actually "The Dead Are Not Really Dead," and that kind of plays into with some of the play on words. There's different layers of meaning when Neville talks. If you understand the contextual background or like the backdrop of the people he was around and their activities, things kind of take on a little bit different meaning than what a lot of people realize. Like when Abdullah told him, "You will die, but not really die."
Yeah, that's another one that gave me goosebumps. I was like, what in the world? What is he saying here?
Well, he was talking about leaving. He was talking about the people in Scripture as states of consciousness, and the state of John the Baptist, excuse me. And when you leave the state of John the Baptist, that it wreaks havoc on you, and you end up dying. Basically, you die to your old self. You die. It's basically the same thing as when you get the pearl of great price, and you no longer look to external things for validation, or to whether it's diet, whether it's rituals. You're not looking at anything in the 3D reality as an external source of power apart from you. You're not looking to crystals or, Neville talked about psychics and Terra and things like that, but that's not the only thing. It's anything that's external that you're assigning as a power, and you're not when you're not recognizing the kingdom of heaven being within you. So when you leave that state of John the Baptist, you go through a death. Basically, you a lot, and that happens a lot of times when you leave fixed states. You are dying to your old self, and it's like a snake shedding its skin, or a butterfly, emerging from the cocoon. And it's not it's not always a fun experience. Because for me, it's been dying to old identities that I've been attached to. And sometimes they're very subtle. Sometimes they're, it's like what the Bible calls having a form of godliness, but denying its power. So there's different types of death and different types of rebirth, and it's kind of like this layer of meaning to it of what Abdullah meant.
So Abdullah, what I'm picturing from this is they hit it off. Obviously, there was some kind of metaphysical connection that they had. In fact, we don't have to get into it here because it'll probably take us too much off the path, but Abdullah went as far as saying, "You and I met thousands of years ago in China," correct? Mm-hmm. So it was basically like they were reincarnated or something into.
Yeah, and that's
very strange.
He believed that he and Neville had been ancient Chinese philosophers together, and that Neville had just forgotten it. So, he definitely had some views, whether it's reincarnation or, different people will pick apart and have their own thoughts on it. But yeah, he did. And the things he taught Neville were not what a lot of people think law of assumption, that Neville just taught law of assumption, or that Abdullah just taught Neville the law. But if you really look at what Neville describes, they were doing different kinds of spirit manifesting back there. Back in that time period, manifesting was mostly spirit manifestations, and Neville doesn't seem to really want to talk about that. But you can see that they were together for a little bit of time before the Barbados story happened. And yet during that time, Abdullah didn't teach him anything that we know of about manifesting money. He wasn't about that. He wasn't about what things have become today, when people, whether they want to call it law of assumption or law of cause and effect, law of attraction, all these different names they have, and then they'll argue over the differences. But it's very commercialized now.
Yes.
And people are very focused on, financial profit, but that's not what he wasn't studying with Abdullah for the whole 3 to 5 year period to manifest money. He even said he wasn't interested in money, and Abdullah never charged him a dime. Neville cleaned for Abdullah, cleaned his apartment, according to, I think it was Freedom Berry who said that. In my book, I cite the sources of who said what.
So this was a very interesting relationship, wasn't it? I mean, it seems to me like they were kind of
an initiation.
It was like they were a student and teacher, but they had a lot of fun together. I mean, it wasn't all just kind of hitting the metaphysics lessons and stuff. I mean, they went to shows and they went to dinners, and they for a long time Neville he was a vegetarian and wouldn't eat pork for sure, wouldn't eat beef, didn't drink, was kind of a teetotaler, I guess you would call him. And then kind of Abdullah kind of brought him out of his shell, from what I understand, right? And Neville just kind of started enjoying food more and drink more. But this is a really fascinating time because, and you explain this in the book better than I'm kind of summarizing it here, but let's get into a little bit about how his attitude was everything. Like Abdullah, it's almost like he went into a cloak mode, like when he went to the opera or when he went to these shows and stuff, and he got fourth row center seats, and it was unheard of for a black person to be able to just waltz in and get the best seats in the house and without being discriminated against or being frowned upon. It's almost like he hypnotized everyone around him based on his own self-worth and self-perception and self-image of himself, right?
I don't know.
Was it that? I mean, it was almost like he was so confident in himself or something.
Neville has said before that there's always going to be, and not just Neville, there's other New Thought teachers who said this too, there's always going to be a rational or logical explanation in the 3D, even though you'll know that it was miraculous, that people will always find a rational explanation. So I can give a very logical, rational explanation for why Abdullah wasn't just, he wasn't doing a show. He was a month, so that whole mansion, there were a lot of opera people going in and out of that mansion, and Neville had said before that his students were largely, the whole Metropolitan Opera. So that right there's connections.
Okay, yeah.
And also now it would be a lot of conjecture on my part, but based off of what I've researched and seen, with Abdullah being a foreigner and not the type of foreigner, like there's different kinds, like where some people might say, well, maybe he was American and put on a turban and, made up an accent. No, everyone in that area, in that house, everyone in that mansion, like with the exception of one person on the census, but pretty much everyone else was from another country already. There were a lot of Germans, so there were a lot of Catholics. There were Episcopalian. There was a culture of people, not just German, Swedish as well, but when you recognize people, and like I've been in other countries before and ran into people and started speaking other languages that they would know, and they knew by my dialect where I had been. They knew that I had been to Rio instead of Sao Paulo by the sound. And so I don't think that, especially with this being Upper Manhattan and not Harlem, I do not believe that he was even pretending to be someone exotic. I think he truly was from Ethiopia, and now he probably had been in other countries like Tamara Emanuel and other Ethiopians had, very well educated, spoke multiple language. I would venture to guess people want to know if he wrote anything. Well, if he did, my guess is they would probably be written in another language. They're probably not in English. So I I think that, and two, you can also tell by someone's appearance, in subtle subconscious things we don't realize that we're picking up on. The Ethiopian people, if you look at on YouTube, Ephraim Isaac, he's an Ethiopian Jew his mother was Ethiopian, his father was from Yemen. And his facial structure, his bone structure with his cheeks are so identical to, you go on Google and look up old Ethiopian priests, and you can look at their faces and you can see patterns with the bone structure that's very different. When people are born and raised in a concentrated area and don't leave that area, they have very unique features that are unique to them, even if they're similar, like the Ethiopians and the people in Yemen. There's just some very distinct facial characteristics so you pick up on things like that when you meet people, and you might not realize you're picking up on it. So, and then if you listen to Ephraim Isaac talk, at least half of his videos are in English. You can kind of tell, like, by the way he talks. I don't know. It's kind of hard to put into words, but you pick up on things. You can just tell the authenticity and that all those things that go into play. So I very much believe that though I don't know at this time what countries he had been to. I do believe that he was among people who were also from other countries, and who also, and two, there's a lot in history that I'm even just learning as far as Black history in European countries that is just not been known to a lot of people. And there was a lot of respect, a lot of old friendships that a lot of people in the mainstream don't know about because it's not a popular narrative. So I think that he definitely still had to have self-concept. That was still not an easy place to live. I'm not minimizing that at all. But I do want to demystify him and show people how human he was, and how, he did have a very strong self-concept. He was a lot like, American minister Garland Anderson in that way, with the boldness and not letting people get to him. But it was it is a bit incredible to think about. How did he manage to do what he did? But I'm not really sure what else to say.
Yeah, no. It's good. And what's interesting too is the whole title of the book, You Are in Barbados. So Neville Goddard, coming back to him, he was born in Barbados, went to America, lived out the rest of his life pretty much in America, and died in America, from what I understand. I always wanted to visit his grave, and then I found out it's in Barbados. So now I have to imagine I'm in Barbados if I'm ever going to see his tomb, I guess, or his tombstone. But I would love to pay homage to him one day at his gravesite, because I think that would be a real bucket list thing for me to do. It would really mean something for me to do that. But so his family was visiting, I guess, and then they left on, kind of the steamship or whatever they were on. And he didn't go with them. And then he started regretting, like, he goes, gosh, I'm really missing Barbados. I wish I was in Barbados. And he talked to Abdullah about this and said, gosh, I really, really want to be with the family at the family home. And that's where this whole title came from, right?
Yeah, I wrote about it from a different perspective than what most people do, because I was really irritated, to be honest, when I first read the story. Well, first I want to say there are multiple versions of the story. This was also frustrating in the research. There's not just one single narrative. Just like there's multiple versions of us and multiple realities, there are multiple versions of this one single story. And so the timeline, it's not inconsistent to the point that I would not say he was dishonest. I would say that there's justification for, to theorize, memory loss, memory lapse, or maybe how he believed that he was constantly dying and returning on this wheel of recurrence and living, basic, didn't know he was dead, type thing. Whatever someone wants to believe, there are inconsistencies between the stories, but they're not material. They're
Right.
not enough to make me think someone's being dishonest, but they are enough to cause frustration
Oh, I bet,
when
yeah.
trying to get a clear timeline of, okay, when did you visit your parents now? Okay, what year was this? Okay, wait, you brought alcohol back to Abdullah and the prohibition wasn't over, or was it? Well, it depends on which story we're going to read.
Wow,
So
that's really interesting.
there's so many different variations of that story. So, and then on top of that, if we accept, whether we accept he met Abdullah in 1929 or 1931 or 1933, there's still this period of time between when they met and when this story takes place, where he knew darn good and well Abdullah's one burning desire was to go back home to Ethiopia. He had not come to New York to initiate Neville initially. That was not his life plan.
Right.
He had a life of his own, he had a life of his own. We don't really know much about that, but you got to figure, being that age, he probably had some significant things happening, and his own people were getting massacred by the Italians. And so he couldn't go home, depending on which year we're looking at here. So it was really frustrating to me. I really had a negative taste in my mouth about Neville when I first read this, because I felt like here is this elderly man who was graciously, giving up his time and energy to mentor young Neville. And now young Neville wants to go off to, go home to Barbados on holiday. And I'm thinking, my first thought was, my God, what if Abdullah died while he was gone?
Yeah.
What if he's waited, and now he's going to have to wait some more. So I wrote a bit about that, because I thought that was, Abdullah recognized the way the desire came on Neville, I do think is significant, because Neville described it the same way he talks when he talks about desire being the fuel for manifesting, and desire being, your desire is your word of prophecy or promise. That is planted in you by God in you. And that's also something other New Thought teachers taught a lot as well, is that you have to have intense desire. And this desire will come on you because it's not, it's coming from your greater dimensional self. It's coming from God. It's whether you want to call it God, consciousness, awareness, it is meant to be. The desire alone the desire also means God's will. So that's why it was important that he worded it the way that he did. And I believe that that Abdullah recognized that desire coming on Neville as, I believe that Neville learned that about desire from Abdullah. So I think that is why Abdullah, recognized, okay, I'm mentoring him. I'm going to help him, get to Barbados here.
Right. Now, why didn't Neville just, I mean, this is something that it dawned on me kind of early on when I heard the story. Apparently his family was not longing for money. It sounds like he came from a family that was well-to-do to some extent, because they had no problem putting him on the ship and sending him home. Why didn't he just ask them? I always wondered that. Why didn't he just write him a postcard and say, hey, I'm really homesick and I don't really have 2 dimes to rub together, but I'd love to come spend the holidays with you guys. They probably would have just, at that point, cut the manifesting short and invited him to come, no?
Well, this is where there's also different versions of Neville, and it depends on who you ask. Because this is where I would differ to a stronger biographer on Neville, because I would get confused myself. Because on the one hand, he would talk about how they were poor, how before the family had money. On the other hand, they had servants, and they to the point that his mother would they something with the food where the servants were not allowed to use clean plates. They had to, eat off the plates that they ate. And so the father would stack up extra food on his plate so that the servants had more food. So I think there's some cultural issues happening that I don't know enough about.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that culture. I know in other countries, like even Ethiopia, and surrounding areas, when there was a different type of slavery where and different types of servanthood where both the master and the slave would be chained together on the road begging for food together.
Oh, wow.
So having read stories like that, I just accept that there's not enough in my awareness.
Sure.
I just don't know all the details. I think it's possible for him to have been both poor in his mind and at the same time not realize how much better off he was than other people. It's something that I would be interested in reading about myself, about his biography, because it is unclear, his and also I think that part of the complexity or nuance to that may be to what degree, and I mentioned that I kind of alluded to this in the end notes a little bit. I kind of wonder how involved his family was in bootlegging, because they owned the liquor store. They supplied the liquor.
Yeah.
So, and there's also rumors I read these stories about piracy and it's rumors. I don't know to how much truth there is to it, but there are rumors that there was a lot of hidden wealth from piracy days. So I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. And I do believe, again, that there are multiple realities, and whatever we place our observation on is what we're going to, see evidence of. So it is very curious, why he didn't want to. I mean, I can understand not wanting to go and then having the desire come after they're gone. But as far as the finances, why he didn't just contact them. I don't know how they would contact, if they had a way of calling, but I don't know. Sure. I think that I found those curiosities as well, but I tried to keep the focus on what I could glean about Abdullah, and just these are just interesting observations. Absolutely. And questions in the parking lot for let them unfold, and sure. But learn what I could about Abdullah's his reactions to Neville and the way he taught manifesting, and that's what I tried to keep my focus on. But they're very, very interesting question.
Oh yeah, and so the story goes that this is kind of what leads into the rest of the book, at least the first book here. The whole "You Are In Barbados" was what Abdullah told him. So he basically said, stop talking about wishing and hoping and praying you're going to go to Barbados, and you're already there, right? And that's a huge kind of catalyst to the whole law of assumption and everything, because he had to pretend like you were already there in your mind, right?
And it ties in with what he was teaching him about astral travel too, because you are where you are at in consciousness. You are who you are conscious of being, and you are where you are conscious of being. So that's what. And Neville also would refer to it as being a law of being. And some people they take the quote because Abdullah had said, who said you're going to Barbados? You are in Barbados. And so people will take that and say that when you're affirming that you're not supposed to say this is going to happen, but that's not what he taught. That's not what he meant, because his own affirmation, what included, I willed it to be, I am willing it to be, and I'll continue to will it until that which I willed is perfectly expressed. It's like the old Christian saying, I was saved, I am being saved, and I'll be gloriously saved. It's past, present, and future all together,
Yes.
because everything is here now. And that's what he was saying, is that I did it, I'm doing it, and I'll continue to do it until that which I've assumed is perfectly realized. It's a realization process. It's actually, some people refer to it as a law of realization. So the wearing the state like a coat, or occupying it, wearing it around, it's all about claiming yourself as the person who has your desire now. That's what self-concept is.
And this is fascinating to me, because I think the rational part of our minds, Rebekah, rebel against this. Like, we're thinking this is preposterous, this is woo-woo stuff. If it were that easy, everyone would just picture themselves a queen or a king, and that would be the end of the story. There'd be no more poverty, there'd be no more, want and things like that. Everybody would have what they would want to have. But I think the difficulty is for our rational minds to wrap our heads around this, right? The concept is simple, but it's not necessarily easy, right? Because that nagging voice in our head keeps contradicting ourselves, right? It keeps contradicting what we're intending. So we say we want to win the lottery, but someone else is going to win, right? Well, so you can't have both. You can't say, I'm going to play the lottery tonight and I want to win the Powerball, and then in the same sentence say, oh, it's fixed, or only, people who are well off win those things anyway, or some guy who runs a liquor store in New Jersey, he's going to win. He always wins. You can't have those contradictory statements. You can't say, I want to lose weight, but I'm a fat ass, or you know what I mean? Like, I want to do this, but I'm poor, I'm stupid, right? You have to kind of really believe who you are.
I'm sending you a link real quick in case this cuts off again.
Sorry.
I don't know what's going on with Zoom. No, it's fine. So the thing that matters, because if people take that to an extreme, they'll start micromanaging their thoughts and they'll get really depressed and have anxiety. What matters is your dwelling state. What matters is where you return to the most. Your state is a mood. It's an attitude. It's your feeling state. Are you feeling in lack? Are you feeling prosperous? Are you feeling, you have this, or are you focused on it's not here, it's not here, it's not here? So whatever you return to the most, it's okay. And that's why Neville would revise his day. At the end of each day, he would go through and mentally revise things to how he wanted them to be. And that's what matters, is your dwelling state. Because otherwise people will, I got into Florence Scovel Shinn for a while. And when I was in the law of attraction stuff, and I had so much anxiety from trying to micromanage my thoughts and trying to, like scripture says, take captive every thought and make it obedience to Christ. Even though we know Christ is our imagination, it's still, if someone is focused on constantly flipping every thought, it can get really, just really stressful. And I think that's also why Abdullah taught Neville about states. And I know there's like arguments in the community about states versus affirmations, or feelings versus thoughts. And people want to like pick something to say, well, this is the only way, but really they all go together. And so whether you affirm yourself into a state, which Neville did talk about in a couple of lectures, where he talked about the I am affirmation,
right,
where you repeat it until you really feel into it. That is what some people do. And then other people, they will just assume the state and let affirmations come from that. And I say that both are correct. Yes, to both, because that's what he said in a number of lectures. He just worded it differently, and it's going to be what people place their attention on as far as what's going to work for them. So if that's helpful to think in terms of the dwelling state, that's what I do. That way I'm not obsessing over mind, because the mind is a monkey mind. The mind is just,
it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, it'll
and then
drive us nuts.
People will worry like, oh no, I had these thoughts earlier. It's like, it's okay. You still get your desire. You're still going to manifest. It's okay. Don't worry. Don't stress.
Boy, our thoughts, I mean, that monkey, that voice in our head doesn't shut up like ever. I mean, even when I'm in deep meditation, it's still nagging me a little bit. Not so much as when I'm not meditating or almost in a trance-like state, but that voice is like nonstop. I mean, honestly, if that were like a relative, you'd want to duct tape their mouth shut. You know what I mean? Like if they just kept talking. And that's the voice we have from birth to death. I mean, it never really stops talking to us.
That's why I use mindfulness so much. I use a lot of mindfulness so that I just redirect attention back to, in mindfulness, it's redirecting back to the breath. And then I take that concept, and when I apply it to manifesting, instead of redirecting back to the breath, I redirect it back to the new truth. Whatever it is I'm trying to affirm as a fact, whatever it is I'm trying to, because it really is all about self-persuasion. It's all about you convincing yourself of this new, what to you seems like a new reality, but it already exists. All things already exist. Like Ecclesiastes 3:1-8 says, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything already exists. So we're selecting that version of reality. We're placing our observation onto it. It feels new to us. So we're really just self-persuading ourselves of this already existing, that we already are this person that we want to be. And just realizing that.
And you talk about how Neville, obviously, like any rational person would do the same, I'm sure, is think, this guy's kind of nutty. What do you mean I'm in Barbados? I'm not. I'm in New York City. I've got like $1 to my name in my pocket. I have no means of getting a ship ticket to go to Barbados. I don't know how I'm going to make this happen. And And Abdullah kind of was, it's seemingly was losing patience with him. And there's a scene that you document quite well where he basically storms off and slams the door on Neville, because Neville's saying, look, it's been a long time now. I've been doing what you're saying to do for weeks and weeks now. I'm not any closer to this manifestation of being in Barbados. I keep, pretending in my head that I'm there. When I walk the streets of New York, I'm pretending it's coconut tree lined streets of Barbados, my home. And
yeah. So what people don't realize is happening is that a lot of people think it's just your thoughts or just your feelings or your beliefs that manifest, and that's not the case. It's everything that's in your awareness. Abdullah taught that it's all the contents of your mind. It's the arrangement of your mind, and that includes. So it's everything that you know to be true. But when we think of the word know in the Greek sense, the Greek word know means to experience. So what a lot of people don't realize, and this is why I'm a big, big fan of imaginal acts, because even if you don't quite believe something to be true yet, if you trick your mind into experiencing it, if you're experiencing something with your senses, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, what you're touching, what you're tasting, if you really experience that with full sensory vividness, with you're feeling it real. Okay, if you're really experiencing that, then you are knowing it. That's a way of knowing it. So Abdullah knew that by getting Neville to experience being in Barbados in imagination, it's forced by law to manifest. It's just a matter of there's a lag time in the 3D, and a lot of people lately in the community are arguing over the issue of an interval of time. But the way Neville taught, there may be an interval of time. And so you don't know when the 3D catches up, but Abdullah knew it was just a matter of time before, that it happened.
And when it happens, the more intensely you picture it, right, that tends to add to the the speed of the manifestation, right? Like if you could taste it, smell it, feel it, all sorts of tactile things in your mind that aids in the whole manifestation process.
Yeah, that's why Neville in a lot of his lectures would talk about how he would actually feel the weight of something in his hands. He would, he would imagine holding something and feel the weight of it. When he was talking about the Barbados experience, while he was walking around imagining it, he could smell the smells. Mm-hmm. He could, just really placing himself there with all of his senses. So that I believe is why Abdullah was also a bit impatient. Well, I mean, I don't know if he was impatient. I think that he just didn't want to feed the old story. He was holding Neville in vision, and he was seeing Neville in a way that Neville didn't see himself. Mm-hmm. Neville was ready to just take the crumbs given to him. Neville was ready to accept the tickets, even though it wasn't first class. And
that's what ultimately happened, is he got first class passage, right? Didn't he get like a note from the ship company or whatever saying, "Oh, we happen to get a cancellation or something, and you can go first class if you want." so he ended up materializing that as well. What is going on, Rebekah, with how this works? Tell me, in your interpretation of how all this stuff works. I believe that life is a miracle. I believe the world is a miracle. I believe reality is not what we were taught to believe that it was. Clearly, it's not what we were taught to think it was. And that there are so many mysteries that we can't understand. But what exactly is this process? Like, you manifested so much. I'm really impressed with your story. And you talk about it in your book, about just the sense of desperation you were in, and just not just financial, but with your marriage and just conflict and homelessness, and you had 3 small children at the time, and you kept envisioning looking out kind of the trailer window and just envisioning this big grassy area where your kids were playing freely, and you materialized that here in the Pacific Northwest where you had lived before, right? And that's what you were kind of envisioning. Yep. And you were in Florida at the time, so that's about as far removed from the Pacific Northwest as you can get. And so what? I was in the armpit of America. Yeah. No offense to sorry, Floridans, but I hate Florida so much. Well, it's funny. That's another thing we agree on. Where like I went once when my oldest daughter, who's now like 25 or something, she was just a toddler. We went to Disney World with some family, and between just pouring sweat from the humidity, alligator signs at the swimming pool, which I thought were a joke, but they said it's not a joke. There's alligators in the pool. To bugs the size of a softball hitting your car. And it's the only place in America, from what I understand, where there's alligators and crocodiles living together. I mean, all these things, plus hurricanes. That was God's way of saying, don't build here, don't live here. This is just like it's just like a geographical anomaly I created just for fun, but you're not supposed to move in here. You know what I mean? I mean, my God, how anybody thought it was a good idea to live in Florida. I don't know. But anyway, so you were in Florida when you were envisioning the Pacific Northwest. So going back to the question, like, I just wanted to go home. Yeah. What happens? What is on a metaphysical or physical or magical level or whatever? Okay. What is going on? Like, is it the universe conspiring in your favor? Is it all in your head and you're imagining things coming together? Or what goes on when you manifested something so incredible like that, and when people manifest all the time? There's a saying, as above, so below, but that's a mistranslation. In the Aramaic, it is the above is of the below. So basically, the above is the below. It's not just a law of reflection. You are the reflection. And Abdullah did talk, if you understand this concept of oneness, this concept of what in the community they call it, everyone is yourself pushed out. Yes. Now, there's always going to be a lot we can't, in our human minds, we're not going to be able to fathom. But even astrophysicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who isn't into what he considers woo-woo manifesting stuff, he does believe. He said in one video that, are you there? Yes. No, I'm here.
Oh, okay, I'm hearing an echo. He believes we could be reflections of, we could be like the reflections in the water of our higher, our greater dimensional self. So even even scientists have really gotten on board with the this concept of reality being like Plato's cave. And this is why I also love mythology, because I look at these myths and they explain reality to me and manifestation to me so much, just so it makes it so much easier to understand, like the story of Echo and the story of Narcissus and Plato's cave. They're all just examples of how reality works, how we are all shadows to each other. We're reflections, we're mirrors. And imagination is the true reality. And when you really grasp that consciousness is the true reality, and whatever Neville would call it conceiving, whatever you conceive in imagination is forced by law to echo. It's forced by law to reflect back to you. Whatever you term it, to kind of grasp it, and then you put it to practice, and then you experience it. And as you experience these manifestations over and over again, and some of them for me happen very quickly. And I mean, I've actually I have struggled at times with what I call an existential crisis, because of just the mind blow. It can be very mind blowing to just one moment be imagining something and then the next having it materialize. And when I say materialize, I don't mean like staring at the table and all of a sudden, an apple appears right before my eyes. But I have played card games where I've imagined, I've pictured my desired card in my mind and then drawn it off the top. I've had really crazy experiences like that. I even led my daughter through a guided meditation one time, where just for fun, I threw in a bag of chips that's her favorite bag, and I just led her through these it was really intended to be a mindfulness exercise of, having her to work on introception, to have her, try out pretending to taste in imagination, and all this sensory vividness. And it was so crazy because it wasn't even a couple hours. I wasn't expecting my mom at all. I had no idea she'd be coming over. And not only did she come over, but she brought the same exact bag of chips that my daughter had visualized, and then my older son was quite jealous and upset, because when he had tested it out, he had chosen a maple bar and his had taken, several weeks, whereas his younger sister only took a couple hours. So there's been a little, competitiveness there, but it works. It really does. And it doesn't have to be a process. It doesn't have to be, there's different ways. I'm not big on criticizing other people's ways. So some people, it's easier for them to do a lot of affirmations to convince themselves that they have their desire. And other people, like myself, will do more imaginal activity. But there's still imaginal activity happening when people are doing affirmations. They're maybe not as aware of. So I say that people should do whatever works for them. Ultimately, it's all, like, even affirming, Neville called being done in consciousness. So basically, what you are knowing to be true, whatever's in your awareness, that's already constantly reflecting back to you. We're all manifesting everything in our reality all the time. We're constantly manifesting subconsciously, and we don't know it. So conscious manifesting is like steering it. It's taking control and saying, okay, I want to cause this now. I want to see this. I manifested a big building size blow up unicorn one day. The stuff that I've manifested is, I was in a very, for me, now I'm not big on the whole law of attraction. You have to be high vibing all the time, because that is very depressing for me, and it's not realistic. It's not my baseline mood. But I will say that for myself, I have had some really crazy things manifest when I've been in a very childlike play mood. So Yeah, I was driving around one day and I stopped at a stoplight and there was this vacant lot by the stoplight. And I just had this funny, random, childlike thought of, wouldn't it be cool if there was a building sized blow up unicorn right there? I don't even know what possessed me to think that. It just was like that. Neville talked about the desire coming on him. I have the things I desire are very random and childlike. And that's the kind of stuff I manifest. So I just had this playful thing and I pictured it. That's all I did. I just pictured it. I was like, I don't know if it was an hour or two later, I was driving around different stoplight and I had gotten turned around. I normally had not gone down this other path. It wasn't more than a mile or two away from where I'd been earlier. So it was not the same. It was not the same spot, but it looked similar. There was also a vacant lot there, but different. I don't know how to describe it, but so it was similar. Because it is a law of identical harvest. Things do manifest in exact likeness to what you imagined. So it was a different vacant area, but still, they're huge building size blow up unit. Like who would put that there?
Wait, so it was just there? It was there like an advertisement or something?
I don't know. It was just this building size blow up unicorn. It was.
Wow.
I don't know. It was so random. I was like, what? Those are the reasons why I truly believe we are living in a dream. We are, whether you want to call it a simulation, a video game, a book, choose your own adventure story.
Yeah.
Those kind of things happen to me. And I've had people witness them. I didn't have witnesses to that one, but I have had witnesses. My children have been witnessed. My mother is still a diehard Christian, reads the Bible literally, but is on board with manifesting. She thinks I'm like a metaphysical Joel Osteen, and we've manifested things together. She calls it prayer, so we pray together. I just believe God is within me, that I'm one with God, and we get along, and we've manifested things together. So, and that was a manifestation too of having people around me be on board, and that I can talk openly about manifesting and not feel like I'm just this weird person that people don't understand. But being able to talk about manifesting with friends and family and manifest with them, that is a manifestation in and of itself too.
Yeah. What advice do you give to people who are listening to this and saying, gosh, I'm just, and to an extent, I'm one of those people. I'll be totally honest with you. It seems like oftentimes, and I know what I'm doing wrong, but I keep doing it anyway because I'm dumb, I guess. But I know that the more we struggle, the more we're kind of like the salmon beating ourselves against the rocks, going the hardest way upstream, that's how we push things away from us. Like the more someone looks for love, you know what I mean? Like whether you're looking for love or winning the lottery, it seems like the harder you try or the harder you try on a math test, that's when you totally space out when it comes time to take the test. And if you just relaxed more and taken a deep breath, you would have done better. What advice do you give to people that feel like they're not manifesting properly or something? Or, I'll be honest with you. I try to bring more manifestations into my life, and I feel like I'm just banging my head against the wall a lot of times where like it doesn't materialize. Then Then you start questioning it. It's hard not to question what you're doing. And is this thing really a bunch of phooey like people say it is? And is it all just a bunch of nonsense? Because, if I believe in it and I'm trying so hard, why hasn't it come into my life yet?
So what I would do is I would look back throughout your life and look at the times that you have had answers to prayer. When you have had things, whether you call it serendipity or whether you call it, miracles happening or things that just unfolded in seemingly miraculous ways. Everybody has some type of, whether they want to call it answers to prayer, or things coming together. And so if you look back at those times, then reflect on what was your imaginal activity leading up to that? How were you living? What were your thoughts? What was your focus? And that will clue you into your most natural way for manifesting. That is how I know for myself that I don't need to go into a state akin to sleep, falling asleep at night, the way Neville described. That works great for other people. I have used it, but I manifest just as well standing up with my eyes wide open, looking out my back door, catching a vision for things. That just works for me, whether I'm doing the dishes or whether I'm just standing with a cup of coffee, looking out and daydreaming. And when I look back at one of my greatest, most miraculous manifestations before learning about manifesting, when I manifested the trip to Brazil to the exact same city and people group I had pinpointed since the 5th grade.
Wow.
And all of a sudden this unfolded. Well, what was I doing leading up to that? I was so caught up in my research. I was obsessed. I was back then, we didn't have personal computers in our rooms. We had a computer lab, and I spent every free second I had in that computer lab researching those kids, researching that town, and really getting caught up. What was I doing? Well, unbeknownst to me, but subconsciously, I was doing what Neville was doing when he was imagining being in Barbados. I was imagining being in Rio de Janeiro. Wow. I was embodying the state, and I didn't think I would get to go for until after I graduated from college. And here I was only a couple years in. But yet it all, because I was so mentally there, I was there in consciousness already. That's what caused it to manifest. And so when you look back at those times, that will clue you in to, what techniques might help you get into the state of the wish fulfilled. But ultimately, there's another train of thought too. If you're really, really struggling, I really recommend listening to Mitch Horowitz.
I like him. I like him a lot.
Yeah, he said something the other day that has really struck with me, that is what other New Thought teachers have taught about persistent desire itself eventually manifesting. I can't remember his exact words, so I don't want to be quoted on it, but there's a little booklet I had come across a couple years ago, and he mentioned it in his book too. It's called It Works. And that is a method.
Yes, I have that on my Kindle. Yeah.
Yeah. So, because I really do, but one of my beliefs, and not everyone shares this belief, but one of my beliefs is that about desire. Really, I really believe that I believe we can change our desires. I believe that some people aren't really clear on their desires. They think they want something, but it's something else. So, but when you have a very strong, passionate desire, like I did, to go to that specific place, that specific people group, that is meant to be, and it's going to happen. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So you don't know how. It's like when I had that vision of that backyard. Now, if you would have told me when I was in Florida, having just been bit by a poisonous spider, having had our RV flooded, having had to rush my baby, to the hospital, all the terrible things going on, I hated it. It was always so awful. If you had told me that in less than a month, I would be back in Washington State, and no longer in a fifth wheel, finally in a house, finally with a backyard, I would have thought you were nuts. I would have, no way. But I caught that vision. I caught the vision. I vision, and it's like, what happens is, for me, I fall in love with it so much, I can't help but to think about it. I can't help it. And so it's not a state of lack of, I'm not focused on why isn't it here yet. I'm just so caught up in this desire of knowing that, even if it's like a someday thing, I know I'm going to get there. I know it's going to happen. And when you really land in that, it is forced to happen. Now, the more you test out the law. Oh, the other thing I would recommend is, so in addition to It Works is one of the list methods. There's other list methods. Another list method I learned from Joseph Ally, and that's where you just very quickly list out 10 or 20 things in present tense, first person present tense, like smaller desires, things that you're not too attached to, that you can forget about. Like, I receive a free cup of coffee. I see a pink car. I see a blue butterfly. Random things that just come to you very, very quickly. And that, what I learned from doing that is that how reality is a constant reflection and mirror, because I started realizing, you were talking about the algorithm earlier. Well, that's what reality really is it's an algorithm, but you program it from within and what you focus on. So if you want to see more of something in your reality, you focus on it within and you imagine seeing it a lot, and you will. It will reflect back to you. So the more you practice, even, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, don't tell people to do little manifestations versus big manifestations or easy manifestation. Well, you know what? I believe that people need to experience things, because the more you experience things, the more you know. And the more you experience, even in maybe to you, it might be easier or little manifestations, but that builds confidence. That builds trust in the law, that the law is always at work, and it builds trust in yourself, and in whether you believe, the whole idea of oneness and understanding what that means. There's different layers of realizing that, and somebody can manifest even if whether they're a Christian or a Muslim. They can still manifest. You don't have to believe that. I mean, for me, it's a lot easier knowing that I am God of my reality, that God is in me and is fused with me and is me. That is so empowering. But other people aren't there yet, and that's okay. I would say to at least focus on, where does God dwell? If you believe in God, you believe in consciousness, where does God dwell? And realizing what it means to have the kingdom of heaven within you, and letting that really digest that, really just simmer in that. And yeah, just keep testing it out in little ways. I like to play. I would do, when I first started my own groups, as I had helped with a couple of groups, I'd been an admin, and I created my own because I wanted people to be able to talk freely about a number of different coaches teaching, instead of being centered on, this person or that person. I wanted to be able to freely talk about everything. And I still have on my Discord group a secret lab channel for anybody who wants to do experiments. And we would just play with manifesting headlines, manifesting just little random things, and just, getting excited about it, because that does build confidence, that you're like, okay, it's kind of like with answers to prayer. I would imagine, even before I learned about manifesting, every time I had a huge answer to prayer, I would imagine it was like a big pile of boulders, and each boulder represented an answer to prayer. So that when obstacles came up, when hard times came up, I could look at my big pile of boulders in my mind and be like, no, I had answers to prayer here, I had answers here, I had answers here. I know my God's going to get me through this. Well, now that I know more about oneness, I have a different view of that, but I still have that same practice, that same mental mound of boulders of, I've manifested this, I've manifested this, I've manifested this. And I know I call it, actually one of my next books coming out is going to be about what I call the widow's elixir. And it's from that parable of the widow's oil that, wouldn't run out. And that is my life. My life is a life of faith. I model my life after my grandmother. I follow her model, where she'd always say, the Lord is my husband. Well, the Lord is your imagination. And when I need something, I got big bills to pay or repairs. I mean, I've manifested thousands of dollars in repairs that I wasn't able to pay, but I manifested them getting paid. Those types of things, all from my imagination, by imagining it, by really experiencing it, by really receiving that in imagination, and then trusting, knowing, it's easy to talk in Christian language sometimes because it's a way of explaining, the Lord is faithful. The Lord takes care of me. I'm taken care of. I'm always provided for. That is, the Christians call it a relationship with the Lord. Well, that's your imagination.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if everything is within us, everything's within us, not just some things are within us. And that includes, like you said, heaven and God and creation and the universe. It's all within us.
He called it the four corners of the universe. He was talking about the Sphinx. And he talked about how the four corners of the universe are within. And I think just really dwelling, really meditating on that and what that means. It's like the verses about the branch, the vine and the branches. It just really meditating on that and just letting it really sink. It has been very, very helpful to me, that knowing what I am means when, and that's another thing that I write about, is the name of God, I am, and what that means and how powerful that really is when you really understand who you claim yourself to be, who you want to be. You're claiming it here and now as though you really are that person. It just, it's forced to happen. You'll be led on a bridge of incidents, and you'll be taking action that you don't even know are leading you towards your aim. And it's very exciting, very exciting. It can be scary, depending on what you have to go through. There's some things that happen as part of desires coming that were not comfortable at times, but then looking in hindsight, oh, okay, I can see how that was part of things that had to come together in order to get me my desire.
Well, this is fascinating. And this may be the longest interview I've ever done, so I'm sorry that we kept extending it. I'm sorry we kept extending it, but okay. I could go on and on. I love
talking about it. I love talking about it, especially this way. It's very comfortable. It's
informal,
and it's very easy.
Well, I would love to have you on again, not just for, let me ask you this. When is so what's the plan for the Abdullah series? Can you tell us, or are you working on the second part, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, there's been some delays. I really like to take my time and meditate on things, and really, there's a lot of work that goes into filtering out what is relevant. I can be very detailed, and I can get really caught up in details, and the things that interest me might not interest other people. I can be sometimes a bit of a walking encyclopedia of meaningless information for people. So, I try to filter through what I don't want it to be boring. But I get excited about things that I don't know what of interest they might all be. And the people that I'm writing about in book 2, gosh, it's like a soap opera with some of these people in history. I mean, I had no idea that what would they be? Great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. I had no idea what wild lives they lived. And oh my goodness, the affairs that were publicized, it's like, do I want to make this juicy and gossipy, or, I'm still, it's almost done, but there's also some very sensitive, very delicate issues, just that are very relevant today. And I just want to be,
sure.
I know I'm God in my reality. I know not to worry about other people's opinions. However, I still do try to exercise some level of sensitivity, especially with these. So obviously with the first one, there was the delicate issue of, racism and race issues. And there's a particular amount of criticism that can come on an author if you don't word things a certain way.
Sure.
So I had to take a lot of care with that. Well, in that same very similar fashion with book 2. Now I'm dealing with anti-Semitism and accusations of anti-Semitism and Nazis and it. I don't know if you're familiar with this I think it's the Statler brothers. I can't remember who it was. My grandfather used to play this song where they said the one on the right is on the left and the one in the middle is on the top and the guy in the rear burned his driver's license. And it's this old folk song that is hilarious. And that is what I am kind of dealing with some of the people in book 2. There's a lot of politically sensitive issues. So I'm just kind of fine tuning and making sure I'm not going to be painted as an anti-Semite because I love Jewish people, Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. I can't wait to have you on again. And I would love to, in the meantime, have you on again just to flesh out some more of this law of attraction stuff. And I feel like we just kind of touched tip of the iceberg. And I'm sorry we went so long, but the book's fascinating. I want everyone to get this. And even if they're not familiar with Abdullah and if they're not even familiar with Neville Goddard, it's a great read. I mean, you don't have to have any background information on Neville Goddard to enjoy this book. I want people to know that it's not like an inside book that, you have to be part of the club to enjoy. Anybody can pick this up, and it's very intriguing and fascinating. And I got the Kindle version on Amazon. People can get that. You have the paperback. What's the best way? We were talking off the air about how to get a hold of you too.
Also about the book, depending on the Kindle device, some devices may have some structural challenges as far as navigating. So the I Imagine app I created has a better ebook version. I mean, it's the same. It's the same price. It's the same book, but it's much easier to navigate on the I Imagine app, depending on which device you have.
And how do they do that then? They download the app?
Go to Google Play. If they can go to Google Play, or if they go to my link tree, there's a web version for iPhone users. So depending on which version they have. But it's the same price, and it doesn't impact me either way. Like I created on the I Imagine app just for the ease of the users who benefit from that version.
Well, that's awesome.
And then as far as to reach me, I'm on I'm learning social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm on X now, trying that out. I have a couple free groups, and then I also have a chat on the app that I'm going to be kicking off here pretty soon. But right now there's a couple free groups too people can join, where we don't just talk about Abdullah, we talk about all of the New Thought teachers, including Garland Anderson is a big one that I eventually want to write about. He was the very, very famous Black New Thought preacher, was once known around the world, invented the milkshakes, was the first Black playwright, so we talk about people like that too. Yeah.
Well, fascinating. I'm glad I cross paths with you, and I know it was meant to be, because when I saw this pop up as recommended book to read, I was like, what? Someone's written about Abdullah, and it's a multi-part series. This is going to be great. And I bought it that minute. I did. I bought it on Kindle that minute, and I started reading it, and that's when I shot you that message, and I was pleased that you wrote me back, and I'm glad we connected here. And let's do it again. If you enjoyed it, I hope you did. Let's talk some more.
Yes, I really enjoy it, and you don't make me record my face, so I am not so distracted. I can just talk freely, and not worry about something in my teeth or all the stuff that goes on when people are recording. So that makes it really nice too for me.
It's more relaxed. It's just like talking on the phone, really. It feels like that. So
I'm more of an introvert. I'm doing more content, but I only recently started showing my face because people were requesting it. People were asking, "Why aren't you showing your face?" Okay, no, I'm not hiding anything. I just, I personally don't like watching faces myself. I like listening more and reading. So I so I am showing my face more, but it's not my preference. So.
Well, we'll have you definitely on again.
It's better for me.
Well, I'll message you on Facebook, okay? And if you're open to it, we'll chat again soon. And then definitely when the second book comes out, I want to have you back on. But there's so much stuff we could talk about in terms of some of these exercises and things we just kind of touched on.
And I would love to talk about like helping people with imaginal acts and just little things like hearing before seeing is a big one. That's a way my mom and I have manifested together. Healing for people is imagining hearing their good reports and stuff. And so that's something I think people could benefit from knowing about, regardless of their faith background. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I had high hopes and intentions of touching on all this stuff, but then I thought, gosh, all this stuff, fascinating tangent. So that's why we couldn't get to everything. But I would love to have you on, multiple times, different segments, and maybe focus on certain things.
Yeah.
And, well, I appreciate you very much. Thank you, Rebekah. And people can find you. I followed you on Amazon, so anything that you come out with, they'll be notified. You can look for Rebekah Jane Carter on Amazon, Instagram. I'll look for you. I'll follow you on TikTok too, because I'm trying to crack that nut. I don't really know what I'm doing yet, but I hope,
I don't either.
I hope they don't ban it.
I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, I hope they don't ban it, because I think it's one of the best avenues out there. I really think in terms of freedom of expression and freedom of thought. Oh, yeah. And that's exactly why I think they're trying to ban it, I think, if you ask me. But we're having too much freedom with it.
I think it's because it's a big stream of consciousness. It's really interesting. I feel like I connect with people better on it than I do Facebook, to be honest. I feel like people are more authentic, but it's also, what I choose to observe. So, but yeah, I'm still playing around with it and figuring it out.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a follow here when we disconnect, and I'll definitely see what you're doing on there, and we'll talk real soon, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Hang in there. Don't hang up yet. I'm going to put the microphone down, but hang on, okay? And I'm going to talk to you as soon as we wrap up here. And that is Hues from the Heart. Our guest was Rebekah Jane Carter. The book is You Are In Barbados, book 1 of the Abdullah Series. Fascinating book. You could pick it up on Amazon, Kindle, or paperback, so check it out, Amazon.com. Look for Rebekah Jane Carter. Also on Instagram, on TikTok, Facebook, X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and more. Thanks a lot for listening, and we will talk again real soon. If you liked what you heard on the podcast today, please support the podcast. It is very, very expensive to run, and to be honest with you, it's not making really any money right now, and I need it to. So please come and support it for $1 a month. You will get instant access to thousands of episodes in the archives and frequent updates of the podcast, all sorts of motivational, inspirational, positive thinking, health and wellness, mental health related topics that I know you will enjoy, and guests like the one you enjoyed today. So please join it. Go to patreon.com/Spencer Hughes and join today for $1 a month. It would really, really change the world of this podcast and ensure that we can get out to as many people as possible, as frequently as possible. Patreon.com/Spencer Hughes. Thanks a lot. Much love to you. As I said, we'll talk again real soon. Thank you.